Graph of an absolute value function. This is the one they would like us to graph. But what you do, this is a shortcut. If you don't want to be drawing a table and plotting points, this is a shortcut to get the same result. You take the parent graph. This is called the parent graph. The one that doesn't have numbers around it, just a plain old absolute value of x. Notice it's not a parent graph because it has numbers around it. This one has already been altered. So you take the parent graph, you draw it. So that tells you what shape you should expect. So this graph that's been altered, there's a negative here, this a -4. This graph has been altered. The shape will stay the same. These numbers, what they're going to do is either shift it to the left, to the right, shift it up, shift it down, reflect it about one of the axes. So we're going to find out how these numbers around the equation that's not the parent equation affect this shape. So it's still going to look like a V, but the V is going to be moved around. So this is the way it affects it. The number inside the absolute value next to the x that's being added or subtracted is going to shift the graph to the left or to the right. In this case, since the number is inside the absolute value bars and we have a subtraction, you're going to do the opposite. So this might seem that this graph is going to move 4 units to the left. But actually, if you drew a table and plotted points, it's the other way around. It's going to move this graph 4 units to the right. How is this negative going to affect this graph? When you have a negative in front of the absolute value, this graph is going to be flipped around the x-axis. So it's going to flip down. So it's going to be pointing this way. So two things are going to be happening. This graph is going to be shifted 4 units to the right and then reflected in the x-axis. That's what this negative does. It flips it around the x-axis. So notice we'll take it a step at a time. Let's do the shifting first. So here's the shifting. We're going to shift 4 units to the right. So this spiky part that was here, 1, 2, 3, 4, it was shifted 4 units to the right. Notice that when the number is added or subtracted within the absolute value, you do the opposite. Now that we have it here, now let's bring in the negative. How is the negative going to affect the graph? It's going to flip it around the x-axis. It's going to reflect it in the x-axis. So this is its final place. So the graph of this absolute value function looks like this. Let's practice some more. So here's the parent graph. Now notice this -4 is not inside the absolute value bars, it's outside. How does that affect the graph? And then notice that we have a negative in front of the absolute value sign. We did that one already. It flips it around. So we're going to do the flipping around. The order doesn't matter. You could shift and then flip, or flip and then shift. So we're going to do the negative, how the negative affects it. It flips it around the x-axis. It reflects it in the x-axis. So far, this has flipped the graph over the x-axis. Now let's apply the -4. The -4, notice it's outside the absolute value. It's not within. If it was within, it would affect it this way. It would be a left or right shift. But since it's outside the absolute value, it's going to affect it this way. It's going to be a vertical shift. So it was flipped around. Now it's going to shift 4 units down. And this is the graph for this function.